On July 9, 2006 in Berlin, the final whistle rang out like the closing out of a Greek tragedy. It marked the fall of one of football's greats, Zinedine Zidane, and the brutal end of French football's golden generation. 16 years later in Doha, another final whistle echoed. It confirmed defeat for Les Bleus, certainly, but a heroic one. Not an ending of another era, but the affirmation of an existing dynasty and the coronation of a new king, though some in Madrid would call him a dictator. Between these two World Cup finals, France underwent a complete cycle of collapse and resurrection. From complete humiliation to global supremacy, the national team hit a reset button so sharp it felt like post-nut clarity. And now to that reckoning, they forged a new identity more resilient and pragmatic than before, one no longer reliant on the genius of a single icon but grounded in the strength of the collective. But how exactly did one of football's most dramatic rebuilds unfold? For France, the 2006 World Cup didn't begin with a roar but with a murmur of anxiety. They arrived in Germany aging and short of inspiration, scraping through the group stage with 2 draws and casting serious doubt over their title credentials. What prevented complete collapse was the providential return of its old guard, Paul Makelele, Lilian Thuram and above all Zinedine Zidane. Having emerged from international retirement a year earlier, the latter's comeback was almost perceived as messianic. Same reassurance you felt when you were 10 years old, 6-0 down in PE, and the teacher rolls up his sleeves to join your team. But that reassurance masked a structural weakness. France didn't just rely on Zidane, they depended on him almost entirely. After an inspired run to the knockouts, the final at Berlin's Olympiastadion was the perfect stage for the maestro's final act. As early as the 7th minute, he had already opened the scoring with an audacious Panenka penalty, stroke of daring befitting the occasion. Italy equalized just over 10 minutes later, but France controlled the rhythm of the game, with even Italian defender Marco Materazzi later acknowledging Les Bleus' superiority that evening. And yet, the story would not end in triumph for France. In the 110th minute away from the ball, Materazzi lay on the ground. A verbal provocation about Zidane's sister had triggered a flash of fury. The response was instantaneous, a violent headbutt to the chest and the red card followed. The French, suddenly deprived of their axis, collapsed psychologically and fell on penalties, almost inevitably. The reaction in France was seismic. Zidane's legend across the nation didn't shatter. If anything, the added layer of human complexity made his legend even more powerful, but for the national team, the consequences were devastating. The Zidane generation was all but over, and with his departure a gaping power vacuum emerged. There was no natural successor. The team had been held together by a single gravitational force. But when that force vanished, so did its coherence. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, we'd be incredibly grateful if you subscribed. Your support helps us grow and continue creating the content you love. What followed the 2006 final was not an immediate implosion, but slow erosion. Euro 2008 was a humiliation. Elimination at the group stage with just a single goal scored. Their qualification for the 2010 World Cup was no less damaging to their credibility, as it was secured only through Thierry Henry's infamous handball against Ireland in the playoff. From there, their campaign quickly descended into chaos. The dull draw with Uruguay was followed by a defeat to Mexico, yet the sporting crests were soon eclipsed by something far more damaging. It all began at halftime against Mexico, when Nicolas Anelka launched a furious verbal attack on head coach Raymond Domenech. When the insults were leaked by a dressing room source in Garnacho-like fashion and splashed across the front page of L'Equipe, France's leading daily sports newspaper, French Football Federation swiftly expelled Anelka from the squad. And what should have remained an internal disciplinary matter instead exploded into a national scandal. But if Anelka's expulsion was the spark, the explosion came 3 days later. At the team's training base in Kaesler, players refused to leave their bus in protest. Officially, it was an act of solidarity. In reality, it exposed far deeper fractures. A breakdown of trust between players and manager, resentment over perceived scapegoating and the absence of any unifying leadership within the squad. Curtains drawn, cameras fixed outside and the world watching on like it was a Mexican standoff. Not long after, the humiliated Domenech was forced to read a statement to the press written by the players themselves, before stepping down at the conclusion of their group stage elimination. It was a total breakdown of institutional authority, an unprecedented act of defiance where millionaire players mutinied in the middle of the World Cup. First round elimination proved a mere formality, and France returned home not only defeated but disgraced. Laurent Blanc inherited what was essentially a team more toxic than the cast of every season of 90 Day Fiancé. Appointed urgently to succeed Dominic, the 1998 world champion was given a clear but daunting mandate: cleanse the dressing room and restore dignity to the badge. He began with a symbolic show of authority, initially refusing to record the principal figures associated with the Kisner incident. However, Blanc soon found himself navigating another controversy, the quota scandal, namely the reports revealing that the FFF had been discussing limiting the number of dual nationality players in the youth academies. Essentially, what the federation was saying was, okay, let's do something so that we aren't labeled Africa FC anymore. Within a country where football had long been celebrated as a symbol of multicultural success, the revelation struck at the moral core of the sport and reignited a deeply sensitive national debate. Amid this turbulence, Euro 2012 became a referendum on Blanc's rebuilding effort. France reached the quarter-finals, progress on paper, but their subdued elimination at the hands of Spain exposed the ceiling of the project. The reigning world and European champions performed at a completely different level, and the gap exposed between France and the summit proved glaring. Blanc had steadied the ship, he had repaired credibility, but he had not rebuilt France into a genuine contender. By 2012, France no longer needed damage control, it needed a complete overhaul of its foundations. At the center of that transformation was Didier Deschamps. Appointed in July 2012, Deschamps brought with him a winning mentality and an uncompromising culture of leadership, having captained that very golden generation to World Cup and Euro triumph in 1998 and 2000. Yet as a player he was never the flashy hero and instead served as a workhorse of a defensive midfielder, one who did the dirty work so that others could shine. It was precisely that mentality, however, that France required in the wake of the scandals that scarred the team between 2008 and 2010. He immediately imposed a clear doctrine: no untouchable stars and zero tolerance for indiscipline. He didn't chase the beautiful football the purists goon over. Instead, his teams were constructed on structure, resilience and adaptability. His pragmatism, often labeled inelegant and even ugly, drew criticism then and continues to do so today. But Deschamps remained unmoved. For him, only results have ever truly mattered. The 2014 World Cup in Brazil proved to be Deschamps' baptism of fire. France arrived rejuvenated and ambitious, playing with a fluidity absent for years. Karim Benzema, finally at the height of his powers in a blue shirt, spearheaded the attack, supported by the energy of emerging talents like Antoine Griezmann and Paul Pogba. But in the quarter-final against Germany, the journey ended with a narrow defeat, but the overall assessment was encouraging, and momentum had been restored. Euro 2016, hosted on home soil, presented a golden opportunity but also a formidable psychological trap. Expectations were at all-time high, and the entire nation anticipated redemption at the final hosted in Paris. Deschamps managed his squad with an iron fist. He governed with discipline, excluding players he deemed destabilizing. Hassan Ben Arfa was left out, and Benzema, embroiled in the high-profile Mathieu Valbuena blackmail scandal, was omitted for the Euros despite his talent. With team balance prioritized, France's march to the final felt controlled and composed. They eliminated Ireland, dismantled Iceland, and, most symbolically, defeated Germany in the semi-final, avenging their loss 2 years earlier and signaling to the world that they were back. The script seemed written. Redemption felt inevitable. Instead, the final against Portugal unraveled into a nightmare. Ronaldo limped off injured in the first half. A twist that appeared to tilt fate in France's favour. Yet Portugal endured, and an extra time header struck to hand France their second major final loss in a decade. But unlike 2006, its defeat did not fracture the group. Foundations laid by Deschamps held firm, and for the first time in a decade, the squad absorbed pressure, expectation and heartbreak without imploding. France had suffered, but it had matured, and because of that, was ready for what came next. After laying the foundations at the 2014 World Cup and Euro 2016, Deschamps' philosophy reached its apex in 2018. Crowning achievement of his tenure, second only perhaps to becoming the first true Frenchman to conquer Russia. During the tournament, France abandoned possession, averaging just 49% and ranking 20th of the 32 participating teams for this metric, in favor of a compact block, designed to suffocate space and unleash devastating counterattacks. In truth, Deschamps' system was calibrated precisely to his players. The tireless running of N'Golo Kanté and Blaise Matuidi, Pogba's range of passing, Giroud's selfless hold-up play, and above all the explosive pace of Antoine Griezmann and the prodigious Mbappe. Their knockout wings became a study in tactical control, calibrated chaos against Argentina, controlled composure against Uruguay, iron discipline against Belgium, and clinical efficiency in the final against Croatia. The triumph bore Deschamps' imprint of a side that was, first and foremost, difficult to beat. It also announced the then 19-year-old Mbappe to the world, yet above all it was a triumph of the collective, embodied most by Giroud, who bagged the same number of goals as I did throughout the tournament but whose impact on overall play proved indispensable. The title win was no accident either, but also the product of a formidable development structure, anchored by the National Football Institute at Clairefontaine, French Federation's elite academy long responsible for cultivating a pool of technically gifted players. That depth explains how France could afford to lose established stars such as Pogba, Kanté and Benzema on the eve of the 2022 World Cup, and still reach another final. Indeed, Qatar also marked the twilight of another golden generation. Post-tournament international retirements of stalwarts like Hugo Lloris and Raphael Varane, followed later by Giroud, officially closed the chapter of what might be called the Griezmann generation. Yet Qatar equally marked a seamless transition for a new wave of talents on the grandest stage. Players like Aurélien Tchouaméni, Jules Koundé, and Theo Hernandez emerged as structural pillars, while Mbappe assumed undeniable leadership in the perpetuation of excellence. The succession was not abrupt, but proof of an ecosystem capable of renewing itself without rupture. The 2022 final against Messi's Argentina served as the perfect counterpoint to Berlin in 2006. For 80 minutes France were overwhelmed, trailing 2-0 and seemingly powerless. In another era, such a half-time deficit might have triggered a surrender faster than that infamous one in 1940. But this team did not collapse. Instead, galvanized by Mbappe's extraordinary brilliance, France orchestrated one of the most spectacular comebacks in World Cup final history. They ultimately fell on penalties. Psychologically, this was no repeat of Berlin. There was no implosion, no emotional fracture, only a defiant resilience that commanded admiration worldwide. That resilience, this visceral refusal to surrender, is the ultimate hallmark of the Deschamps era. That is the quiet strength he will pass on, and it is why the dynasty of Les Bleus feels far from finished. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe for more content like this. Also, don't forget to hit the notifications bell so you never miss a beat. And with that, we'll see you in the next video.